Most important battle of the Second World War wasn't fought for land. It was fought for something you still pay for every single day. Every time you fill your car, buy groceries, or watch fuel prices climb, you're feeling the ripple effects of a decision made more than 80 years ago. At the time, almost no one realized what had just changed. Military leaders believed they were solving a wartime problem. Instead, they revealed a truth that would reshape global power, redraw alliances, and influence nearly every modern economy. Because the lesson wasn't simply that armies need fuel. It was that whoever controls energy can influence everything built on top of it. So how did one wartime lesson transform oil from an industrial resource into one of the most strategically important assets on Earth? To answer that, we have to return to a world that still believed coal, not oil, would define the future. At the beginning of the 20th century, coal was king. Factories burned it, railroads depended on it. Steel mills consumed mountains of it. Navies carried enormous reserves of coal to keep fleets moving across the oceans. For more than a century, industrial strength was measured by access to coal mines and rail networks. Countries with abundant coal believed they possessed everything needed to remain great powers. Oil certainly existed. It illuminated lamps, lubricated machinery, and powered a growing number of automobiles. Yet many governments still viewed it as a useful supplement rather than the foundation of national security. Even as trucks and aircraft became more common, strategic thinking remained rooted in older assumptions. Wars would still be decided by factories, by manpower, by steel, by industrial endurance. Then technology quietly began changing the battlefield. Internal combustion engines offered something steam never could: greater speed, greater flexibility, longer operational range. Tanks no longer relied on railways once unloaded. Aircraft could strike hundreds of miles away. Trucks replaced horses across expanding supply lines. Mechanization was spreading, but no one yet understood its true implications. Military planners focused on building more machines. Far fewer appreciated what those machines would consume: fuel, and not just fuel, an unimaginable quantity of it. When the Second World War erupted in 1939, nations quickly discovered that producing tanks was only half the challenge. Keeping them moving was something else entirely. Entire armored divisions could become useless if gasoline failed to arrive. Aircraft without aviation fuel became expensive decorations. Ships without fuel oil remained trapped in harbor. Suddenly, logistics, the invisible system behind every battlefield victory, became just as important as courage at the front. Yet even then, many believed fuel shortages were temporary wartime problems. Once peace returned, surely the world would return to familiar patterns. That assumption would not survive what happened next. As Allied commanders prepared to liberate Western Europe, they faced an unprecedented challenge. Success depended not simply on defeating enemy forces. It depended on feeding an enormous mechanical army every single day. Hundreds of thousands of trucks, aircraft flying constant missions, engineering units building bridges, medical convoys evacuating casualties. Every movement required fuel. Every mile demanded more. Military planners reached a remarkable conclusion. Instead of treating fuel as just another supply item, they would build entire campaigns around guaranteeing its delivery. One innovation followed another. Temporary fuel depots appeared across liberated territory. Engineers repaired ports almost as quickly as they were captured. Pipelines crossed the English Channel through the ingenious Pluto project, reducing dependence on vulnerable tanker ships. The famous Red Ball Express sent endless truck convoys racing across France, delivering fuel, ammunition, and supplies around the clock. These operations were logistical masterpieces. Few attracted headlines compared with dramatic battles. Yet without them, those battles might never have been won. Every successful offensive depended upon an uninterrupted river of petroleum. The lesson became impossible to ignore. Mechanized warfare rewarded those who mastered energy logistics, not simply those with larger armies. Military institutions around the world watched closely. The conclusions seemed obvious. Future wars would require even more engines, more aircraft, more armored vehicles, more mobility, which meant one thing: much more oil. It seemed like a perfectly rational conclusion after the experience of global war, but this was only the first domino. When the war ended in 1945, nations did not abandon mechanization, they accelerated it. The same factories that had produced military vehicles shifted towards civilian automobiles, trucks, tractors, and construction equipment. Economic recovery became inseparable from petroleum. Road networks expanded across continents. International trade increasingly depended on diesel-powered shipping. Commercial aviation connected distant cities like never before. Oil was no longer merely a military necessity. It became the bloodstream of economic growth. But another consequence emerged. The countries possessing major oil reserves suddenly occupied a different position on the geopolitical map. The Middle East, already known for vast petroleum deposits, gained extraordinary strategic importance. Governments that once attracted limited global attention became central to international diplomacy. Pipelines became strategic assets. Ports became national priorities. Shipping routes through narrow waterways carried global significance. Military alliances increasingly reflected energy security alongside traditional defense concerns. The Cold War deepened these trends. Both superpowers recognized that industrial economies required stable fuel supplies. Energy infrastructure became part of national security planning. Protecting production, transportation, and refining capacity became military objectives as well as economic ones. Meanwhile, technological progress increased dependence further. Jet aircraft consumed enormous quantities of aviation fuel. Modern armored divisions required sophisticated fuel distribution systems. Naval fleets burned refined petroleum products on a vast scale. Even nuclear powers, despite possessing atomic weapons, still relied on conventional logistics powered overwhelmingly by oil. History had produced another surprise. The more advanced militaries became, the more dependent they grew on uninterrupted energy supplies. Civilian economies followed the same path. Suburban development encouraged automobile ownership. Highways replaced many rail connections. Agriculture transformed through diesel-powered machinery, synthetic fertilizers, and mechanized harvesting. Food production itself became increasingly tied to fossil fuels. The average family rarely noticed. Fuel simply appeared at service stations. Supermarket shelves remained full. Electricity stayed available. Yet beneath everyday life operated one of the largest logistical systems humanity had ever constructed. Then came the shocks. In the 1970s, oil supply disruptions demonstrated how vulnerable industrial societies had become. Energy prices surged. Inflation accelerated. Economic growth slowed. Long lines formed outside filling stations in several countries. Governments suddenly realized that decades of prosperity rested upon remarkably fragile supply chains. The lesson from wartime logistics had expanded far beyond the battlefield. Energy security had become economic security. Financial systems adapted as well. International oil trade increasingly became intertwined with the US dollar, strengthening its global role in international commerce. The so-called petrodollar system reinforced connections between energy markets, financial institutions, and geopolitical influence. Oil no longer represented only physical fuel. It became deeply connected to global capital flows. Another domino had fallen. Rapid industrialization in Asia further increased demand. Manufacturing centers required electricity. Container ships transported goods across oceans. Factories consumed plastics and chemicals derived from petroleum. Globalization itself became heavily dependent upon affordable energy. Every smartphone, every refrigerator, every automobile, every shipment crossing the seas carried an invisible energy story behind it. Few people realized how many layers of modern civilization rested upon the logistical lesson first demonstrated during the Second World War. And history still had another twist waiting. As climate concerns grew during the late 20th and early 21st centuries, governments invested in renewable energy. Wind turbines appeared across coastlines. Solar farms spread across deserts. Electric vehicles entered city streets. Yet even this transition highlighted oil's extraordinary legacy. The global economy had been built around systems designed for petroleum. Changing those systems would require decades, enormous investment, and complex geopolitical adjustments. The original wartime decision continued echoing across generations. Today, the influence of that historical chain reaction reaches into everyday life in ways many people never notice. When shipping costs increase because fuel prices rise, imported products become more expensive. When diesel prices climb, farmers face higher operating costs. Those costs often affect grocery bills. Air travel becomes more expensive when aviation fuel rises. Manufacturers adjust prices because transportation touches nearly every stage of production. Energy also shapes strategic competition. Governments seek diversified supply chains. They invest in strategic petroleum reserves. They protect maritime trade routes through critical choke points. At the same time, they compete over emerging energy technologies, battery materials, and critical minerals that may define the next era of industrial power. Even advanced semiconductor manufacturing depends upon enormous amounts of reliable energy and sophisticated global logistics. The same principle remains. Production means little without dependable supply. The battlefield lesson became an economic lesson, then a geopolitical lesson. Now it is a lesson affecting households around the world, and the consequences are still unfolding. It is tempting to believe history changes because of dramatic battles alone, but battles rarely reshape the world by themselves. Their lasting impact comes from the lessons institutions choose to remember afterward. The Second World War proved that modern military power depended upon fuel, delivered at precisely the right place and time. Governments applied that lesson to national strategy. Industries built around it. Financial systems adapted to it. Entire regions rose in geopolitical importance because of it. None of this happened overnight. No single meeting planned the modern energy economy. Instead, thousands of rational decisions made by engineers, logisticians, economists, soldiers, businesses, and governments combined into a chain reaction that transformed the world. History rarely changes because one resource suddenly becomes valuable. It changes because people discover they can no longer function without it. That is how oil became more than a commodity. It became a measure of strategic resilience, economic influence, and national power. Whether the future belongs to oil, electricity, hydrogen, or technologies still being developed, one lesson remains remarkably consistent. The nations that master the logistics of the next essential resource will shape the next chapter of history, just as those who mastered fuel logistics shaped the last. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden stories behind history, war, and the global economy. And before you leave, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. You never know which decision from the past is still shaping your life today.